My talk today is about communications and media technologies and how it influenced my life and how it will likely influence and shape yours, both personally and professionally. So I'm going to take you back a little bit to the 60s, now that I've hit my 60s, and some of my American mates call me a card-carrying, gold card-carrying digital geezer. When I was in my early, before teens, I had a home where we had two devices, and these basically are images of those. I watched black and white television, The Three Stooges, Superman, The Lone Ranger. There was a telephone in the corner. The telephone actually had a pad. It was for writing down messages. It wasn't for conversation. It was a rotary, as you can see. And so life was very, very different growing up back in that day. What changed my life that summer was my 40-year-old dad took me to see the Beatles on their first American tour. 60,000 screaming teens and 20-year-olds. I barely could hear a thing. It convinced me I needed some new technology in the house. I took my summer earnings from my job and I bought a stereo. Changed my life. That September, when I entered school, I changed my name. In 1964, I became Hal. 4 years before Isaac Asimov and Stanley Kubrick decided to invent a dystopian first AI computer named HAL 9000, supposedly IBM -1. That movie, when I saw it, made me really, really think. It was the first time in cinematic history that there was a phone call from Earth to outer space shown in that movie. And I thought about that because my grandmother used to say, don't talk too long on the rotary phone, it'll cost a pretty penny. And I was sitting in the theater thinking, how much will this call cost? And then later, actually, I started to think about, given it was between Earth and space, what are the time zone issues? So I have to share a fun family fact. My mom and dad, God bless them, I Skyped with them this morning on the porch of their home in South Jersey. They were the first reality television couple. They were married in 1953 on a broadcast show on CBS called Bride and Groom. It was actually before videotape, and I discovered that we had a copy of their wedding upstairs on the attic on 16-millimeter film that the show had provided. It sort of set the stage for what would become, I think, karmic destiny for me. 20 years later, when I was in my second year at Antioch College, one of the most radical universities in America, I took a class called Media as Propaganda. I had to sign something saying that I could be on the FBI surveillance list if I took this course because it was taught by people who were considered subversives in the early 70s. I was given this book to read. This book actually is the only book ever written by a guy named Michael Shamberg. Michael Shamberg went on to become a Hollywood producer and be Academy Award nominated for films like The Big Chill, Aaron Brockovich, and my favorite John Travolta film, Get Shorty. What he advocated in this book, basically, was that we were living in a world of one-way media that was basically the fifth estate. It was centralized. It was a hegemonious point of view, and that we needed to arm ourselves. And at that stage in time, the first generation of portable video equipment came out. And that is what you see in that graphic right there. It was a 16-pound reel-to-reel black and white recording unit and a 6-pound camera. And so I decided that I was going to basically start to change my life. And I took $2,000 that my grandmother had given me to buy a car, and I bought this unit. And it did change my life. I started recording friends and playing it back for them. It became a sixth sense. It became a way for people in that era to actually see themselves in a mirror out of time. And then I turned it into a little business that was recording all kinds of things from, oddly enough, other people's weddings. But when I graduated, I joined what was the first and most unusual job collective created at that time. 5 small places in America who had small cable systems were required by law to do public access and local origination programming. And I moved to Aspen to become a producer for what was basically a small village community where we would record things, everything from skiers on the slopes to what people were thinking. And it was an amazing time. I became a VJ on Thursday night. It was a fascinating period until 20th Century Fox bought the Aspen Mountains with the profits from Star Wars in 1978. It was time to go elsewhere. I had coined the word VideoSense before, and I decided to turn it into MediaSense to be a little broader. And I had this idea that we were going to use early satellites to change the world, enable people to communicate in new and different ways. Interestingly, it resonated with a young man who's no longer with us, John Denver, who unfortunately passed away in a Monterey light plane accident. But he was running a foundation called WinStar and inviting really creative thinkers on the cutting edge, like Buckminster Fuller, to talk about what they were doing. Before he passed away, we did a live event in 120 countries, live by satellite. It was one of the first events. It was 1979 when we started this company, and it changed my life. I thought, this is great. I'm going to basically enable people to communicate in new ways with new tools, and it'll make a difference. Well, 3 years later, we went public as Telemedia International. We sold 37.5 million shares at 2 cents plain, and we banked our first million as a company. And we went on to do basically corporate training. We coined another word. I like those two one-word words, teleskills. And we started training people how to use these technologies to have effective meetings, because people weren't used to being in one place and another and trying to organize what they should do and even show up on time. So this company was basically the basis for what I decided I was going to continue to do with my life. 4 years later, I was giving a talk to investors and technologists in Silicon Valley, and this was the first mobile phone. It was in my back pocket. I was standing on a stage like this in front of a couple hundred people, and it rang. And technical faux pas, I actually stepped away from the podium, I answered it, and I said, I can't talk now, call me later. I went back to the podium, and I was like embarrassed, what do I say now? I said, ooh, it was the White House. I didn't know they had my number. Nobody laughed. I said, no, it's really my wife. She's the only one who has my number. But technology 30 years later now has changed so much. Here we are, 5 billion mobile phones later. It pervades our life, and it is pervasive in our lives. You can't go anywhere without having your phone with you. My son is 23. If he dropped his phone, he'd be at Apple in 20 minutes getting another one, or if he lost his phone or broke it. So and what are we doing with our phones? What's become the number one thing? It's the selfie. In fact, some people can't take enough pictures of themselves simultaneously so that they have every point of view. But there's lots of and amazing possibilities for what you can do with it, right? Breaking news. Ben Bagdigian, author from the 70s, said, electrons have no morals. They serve free men and tyrants with equal fervor. Prophetic, huh? Here we are. So what's happened? Decentralized media. You can share with people. You can have global netizen journalists. There's new points of view, and that's what we need. We need more and more people to use these media tools in ways that are proactive and world positive. And one of my favorite slogans from the radio back when I was in San Francisco, a local radio guy, Scoop Nisker, would say it every day at the end of his news. If you don't like it, go out and make some of your own. And here we are. Our youngest generation is doing it. As Jimmy Durante, a comedian that I know from watching that black and white TV set back in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, he would say, everybody's got to get into the act. What is going on? What will be the social impact of all this? What will be the cultural impact of this? What will be the behavioral impact of all of this? You've probably seen the meme of a little baby trying to swipe a magazine and can't figure out why it doesn't change, the image won't change. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And here's a basic statistic. Next year, internet usage will exceed television usage. What is going to be the result of all of this? And how will you, in the tools that you use, think about it? Just to give you a snapshot, these are some of the infographics. This is what's going on right now on the copper, on the fiber, in the Wi-Fi, every minute of every day. And the gigabytes and the Google bytes and the petroglyphs, they're not going to decrease. It's only going to get to be more. Is it going to be a circle of Babel, or will it benefit us in some way? What will our future look like? I went to a play in Wellington, and the play was about a couple that actually continued their relationship when one moved to Mars because of work in a virtual space, and they lived out their life in a virtual space. Is that where we're headed? Do you want to be the one who goes to a Coldplay concert by sitting on your couch and putting on the VR goggles? Right here in New Zealand, and this was just announced the other day, Air New Zealand has formed a partnership with Magic Leap. Magic Leap is the third unicorn, in a way, of New Zealand after Xero and Rocket Lab. Weta Digital and Weta Workshop are very involved in what happens with Magic Leap. And Magic Leap is basically trying to create augmented reality without goggles. That would be a very interesting thing to see. So if you haven't looked at some of the Weta Digital special effects demos, Google Magic Leap. Very interesting company. So what's your media sensible diet? This would be mine. How much time a day do you spend with your media? And what do you do with it? Are you watching television? Or are you watching YouTube? Are you going down a rabbit hole chasing some video for some obscure application that's part of the long tail? How do you think about what your media sensible diet ought to be from moment to moment? I would challenge you. There's basically 3 ways to interact with your media. Consume it, create it, or interact with other people via the networks, whether it be audio, video, even VR now. How will you use the new media that's available, the old media in its present form, and what will you do with it? I sometimes get disheartened. This is a photo of the original cafe in San Francisco that provided Wi-Fi for the first time. And they absolutely went retro. After a while, they took it all out. And everybody was supposed to come and meet each other, have a conversation, something that was said earlier that's really important to all of us. And they still bring their laptops. In fact, now they bring their own Wi-Fi with them. So what is going to happen with how we do things? I am heartened by this young man who I discovered a few weeks ago. He is 26 years old. When I was 26, I started that company, MediaSense. He's 26. He's been to 193 countries around the world. That's pretty awesome. And he was interviewed, and his #1 response was that the observation I see among all of the people I've met in the diverse cultures I've traveled in is that they all want to connect. And we now have these tools to enable us to do that and to have communication, have dialogue. So will we use it that way? And how can we better do that? So there is a Chinese curse, as some people say. It's actually based on what is supposed to be an English blessing. May you live in interesting times. You could substitute the word interesting with probably 100 to 200 other adjectives. What we have basically for all of us to look at today in terms of our media and how we use it is what will we choose to do with it, and how can we make a better world for us and our children? The one thing I can tell you, exponential change is the new normal. So pay attention to it, because if you don't adapt, if you don't keep your finger on the digital pulse beat of what's going on and take these tools and use these tools and create ways that we can help humanity, what will we do with it otherwise? I wish you all well. I've said during the past 2 decades, I'm really looking forward to seeing 2020, which is a bit of a pun. And may the proverbial force be with us all as we do. Cheers.